Hello everyone and welcome back to the video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Watch the Throne. If you don't know what Watch the Throne is, you've probably been living under a rock, but it is a summit style event with 10 players already qualified, and I'll get to them in just a second. Our main focus today will be these 15 lovely gentlemen right here who have all made it to the vote-in phase. Only 3 players will be getting voted in, and we're going to be going over their previous head-to-heads versus the already qualified players, the opponent they have the best shot against, and all that good stuff. Let's just get right into it. Also, I should mention that the voting phase has just started as this video comes out, so there's a link down below to the start.gg page if you want to go look at the merch and support your favorite player. Our first player is going to be Elijahman. For those of you who are unfamiliar with him, he is one of, if not the best Shulk in North America. Obviously, it's tough to say who the best Shulk in the world is because Kome is still an amazing player, but Elijahman's got some pretty good results, most notably his 3rd place at Battle Z Umad, where he was able to beat players like Smok, Babino, and Tilde. Now, he doesn't have a ton of information against the players that are already qualified, and speaking of those players, I forgot that I didn't mention them. You're going to have MK Leo, Spargo, Tweak, Light, Bloom, Gluttony, Proto Bonham, and Akala as your invited players, and Buzz and Mia both qualified through SmashCon, and the only record that Elijahman has versus any of those players is going to be an 0-2 record versus Zomba. One of them he lost at Battle Z Umad, and the other one at the Big House 10, and I would say his best matchup going in would either be Akala or Mia, at least in theory, and it's a pretty tough draw for this entire bracket, to be honest, because even though I think Shulk does actually pretty decent versus both Steve and Game Watch, I think he does really well versus Game Watch. Akala and Mia have insane records versus Kome. Now, it's not the same player, and that's why I am giving Elijahman the benefit of the doubt. But honestly, I don't think this is a super great Shulk bracket, but if anyone can make it work, it would definitely be Elijahman. Our next player is going to be Nao. He's had some pretty incredible runs as of late. Most notably, though, he's going to have that performance at SmashCon where he popped off super hard, beating players like iGreg, Stefan, Tachyon, Chunky Kong, Noi, and Tweak. That Tweak was obviously very important because he is one of the players at Watch the Throne. The other records that Nao has is an 0-1 record versus Gluttony, 0-1 versus Mia, and an 0-2 record versus Akola. And because of this, my top pick for Nao to go into is going to be Tweak because he's proven he can do it in the past, and he looked incredibly dominant in that matchup. Now, I do think that Tweak probably could have been playing a little bit better, but Nao showed incredible proficiency there, so I am going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I also think that the Buzz is a bit of an interesting one because I think Corrin does very well versus Rosalina, but Corrin doesn't have a great time versus Minmin, and we did see the Buzz Minmin versus Jake at Circus CFL 2, so clearly that character is still on his lineup, and it's a little bit of a scary matchup there. And then, obviously, I think that Corrin does do well against Steve and okay enough versus Game & Watch, but he hasn't had a lot of success versus Akala or Mia in the past, though. Corrin Steve, again, I actually think that's a pretty decent match for the character, and it wouldn't shock me super hard if Nao was able to get the upset over Akala, but he hasn't been able to do it before, and he's been able to upset Tweak, so I'm going to say that he's able to do it again. Our next player is going to be T3 Dom. Now, this is a player that we don't have a ton of information on as of late. He's only been to 3 major events this year with a 49th at Let's Make Big Moves, 65th at Genesis, and a 49th at SmashCon. And he's picked up some pretty solid wins there. Wins on MFA and Goblin. MFA potentially someone he'll meet in this bracket. Andres FN, Mugen, Beastly. He's beat a lot of very good players, but we just don't have a ton of data on him. He also has a 7th place at Wave Dash with wins on Rockman and Capitan Cito. That's probably his best placement of the year. And then his head-to-heads versus players that are already in the event. He's going to have a 1-6 record versus Leo, 0-3 versus Fargo, 0-2 versus Gluttony, and a 1-0 record versus the Buzz. Now, he has beaten Leo one time before. Is that going to be a favorable matchup? No, absolutely not. And the Buzz is definitely going to be my pick for the player that I think T3 Dom is going to upset. His character just does extremely well versus pretty much the Buzz's entire lineup. I think Minmin could maybe be a problem, but I would definitely favor T3 Dom if the Buzz does go Minmin just because he is so proficient in that character. And the Buzz's Minmin is good, but it's not good enough, I think, at least to keep up with T3 Dom, but I could be proven wrong. And by the way, the reason that I think T3 Dom is going to win is because Rosalina gets absolutely thrashed by Richter, and that's the character that the Buzz has been having the most success with as of late. So if T3 Dom can make the upset, I would expect it to be over to Buzz. Our next player is going to be Karama. Now, this guy doesn't need a ton of introduction. He's going to have a 5th place at King of Fields and Circus CFL 2, 7th place at Invitational, and a 9th place at Gommel. He's going to have an 0-6 record versus the Buzz, 2-2 versus Spargo, 1-3 versus Leo, 1-2 versus Gluttony, 0-3 versus Tweak, 0-3 versus Akala, and an 0-1 record versus Light. Now, if I have to be completely honest, this isn't a super great bracket for Karama. He's got a lot of people that are consistently beating him, and to be honest, it's pretty much all the people that are beating Karama. Like, this is the list of people who beat Karama. Outside of this, he's got pretty good records versus pretty much everyone else in the world. I'm sure there's a couple players that I am forgetting, but he got a lot of very bad draws here. I'd say his most favorable matchup would be against Spargo or Bloom Spargo because they've been trading sets back and forth, and Spargo did win their last encounter, which means that, you know, it's Karama's turn, and Bloom is just because the best thing about Karama is by far his movement, and I think he will be able to play around Bayonetta's movement enough where he's able to take that set. And also, I should just add that Karama isn't guaranteed to get into this event, but with the KC backing, I would be very shocked if he wasn't here. Next up is going to be Pina and Taric, and the reason I'm wrapping them in together is because they're going to be facing the same problem of being on Little Mac. This isn't really a Little Mac bracket, but to be fair, nothing is. You're going to have Pina with an 0-1 record versus Leo and Tweak, and Taric with an 0-5 record versus Proto Bonhomme. And if you look at the lineup, you're going to have Leo, Spargo, Tweak, Proto Bonhomme. Those are all people who are playing sword characters that don't really have to engage with Little Mac. You're going to have Akala DeBuzz with Mia. Absolutely, they're not going to be losing alone Little Mac. The only players I could see possibly getting upset by Little Mac are Gluttony and Light. Light especially just because he's playing Fox, which is a super light character, and he's just a more aggressive player, but it's not like he can't play defensively. Obviously, he has the capabilities to slow down his pacing, and I would definitely favor him going in. Same thing for Gluttony as well. He is a much slower player, but the fact that you're going to be hitting with your face with Warrior, you're going to have to engage a lot more. Same thing with Fox. It can be a little bit scary, but it's going to be an uphill battle for sure. And then Bloom Forever, again, I really don't see him losing to Little Mac, especially with the mobility. The air mobility that Bayonetta has is going to be incredibly difficult to track him down. So it's rough for the Little Macs. Is it impossible that they upset a player like Light and Gluttony who has to engage more? No. Are they favored? Absolutely not. Our next player is going to be Takara. He's got a bunch of solid placements as of late, most notably 5th place at both Delta 5 and Maysuma Top 13. And really recently, he's got a 13th place at Terra. Now he has an 0-4 record versus Mia, not a super great matchup there, and a 1-1 record versus Proto Bonhomme, which is honestly pretty good. And the player that I would favor him the most against is definitely going to be Gluttony. Gluttony has struggled versus Ken in the past, whether it's just because he has really difficult time SCI just because of his hand issues, so he pretty much elects to not do it, as well as I think Ken doing pretty well into Wario. Now, the players have never played before, and even though that Gluttony has lost to Ken players in the past, it doesn't mean that that's going to be a free win. But looking at the entire bracket, I don't think it's a super great win for Ken. I know I've said that a lot in this video, but to be fair, it is a really difficult bracket for most characters because most people are playing the best of the best in the game, except for the buzz on that Rosalina. But I could definitely see Takara taking an upset over Gluttony. Next up is going to be Luis. This guy is a monster at the regional level. He's going to have a win at Gateway Legends, 5th place at Wave Dash, 2nd place at High Res, 1st place at Back in Blood 7, and a 5th place at the Invitational, as well as a 17th place at SmashCon against players already qualified. He's got an 0-4 record versus Light, 1-2 versus the Buzz, 1-2 versus Spargo, 0-3 versus Leo, 0-1 versus Proto Bonhomme, and 0-1 versus Tweak. And I think the player that he would be most favored against is actually going to be Aqua, because Luis is one of the best players in the entire world versus Steve. Recently, he beat Jake at the Invitational. If you look at his SmashCon run, he beat both Riku and Pocket 3-0. He's overall has a 2-0 record versus Pocket, and he has never played against Aqua before, but he's just incredibly good at that matchup. I also think that Valentina has the tools to be able to deal with Steve, especially if you're on your calls with minecart, you have that backer, and you have that dash tech to just kind of throw it out. So I definitely think that Luis could take a set over Aqua, even though he's the best player in the world. Also, I should give a shout out to him having a chance versus Mia, because that's another matchup that Lake Paulo does pretty good in. Next up is going to be Riddles. Again, this is a player that doesn't need a ton of explanation. Recently, he's got 2nd at CEO, 5th at Gommel, and a 9th at SmashCon, and those are just his last 3 big events. He's got a 7-3 record versus the Buzz, 6-4 versus Tweak, 3-4 versus Light, 3-4 versus Leo, 2-4 versus Spargo, 0-5 versus Akala, 3-1 versus Gluttony, and an 0-2 record versus Proto Bonhomme. And he does have the choice of both the Terry and the Kazuya, and I would favor him against Gluttony. Post-quarantine, he's got an 0-3 record versus Gluttony, rather a 3-0 record, and he's beaten with both Terry and Kazuya. And as I kind of talked about earlier, Gluttony doesn't have the best record versus FGC characters, so definitely gonna favor Riddles there. But honestly, Riddles has a good shot against a lot of these players. I mean, you heard the records that he has. He's beaten Spargo, he's beaten Leo, he's beaten Light, he's beaten Tweak, he's beaten the Buzz. So it's kind of tough to say which one he's super favored against, because he's not really an underdog like most of the players on this list. He's kind of just someone that's literally at the caliber, if not better than some of the players already at this event. So if Riddles does show up, he's definitely gonna make a dent in the bracket. Next up is going to be Masa. This is another player that doesn't have a ton of attendance, but usually when he shows up to stuff, he does do fairly well. He's going to have a 5th place at Sumabato SP Ultimate, 3rd place at Gen 2.0, 4th place at Wave 4, and a 1st place at Gen 1.1. Now, his head-to-heads aren't super great versus the qualified players. 0-4 record versus Proto Bonham, 0-2 record versus Akala, and an 0-1 record versus Mia. And the player that I would favor him against is going to be Light, considering that Light has an 0-2 record versus Tilde. And it's tough to say who's better between Tilde and Masa because both players literally go to 0 events and both of them have similar peaks. But I definitely think that Masa is the caliber player where he can beat Light, and I'm not going to say it's a super winning match for Falco, but I actually think that Falco does decently well versus Fox, especially in the edge guarding aspect. You absolutely get to bully that character off stage, so I could definitely see Masa taking that upset over Light. Next up, you're going to have Siskey. He's got a 5th place at Smash Factor X, 4th place at King of Fields 3, 17th place at Gommel, and a 9th place at Terra. And he's really been trying to reclaim the title of the best Samus in the world from Yara. And honestly, he's getting pretty close. But I will say, out of all of the players in the voting phase, I think that Siskey probably has the worst bracket, at least of all the players that are playing real characters, because obviously Pina and Taric are going to have to fight an uphill battle pretty much every single time, but he's got a 3-12 record versus Gluttony, 0-9 versus Bloom Forever, 1-1 versus Tweak, 0-2 versus Leo, 0-2 versus Spargo, and an 0-1 record versus Akala. And Samus is a character that I think isn't super meant for invitationals, because her matchup spread isn't insanely good, but overall, as a tournament character, she's incredible, especially for long runs, but in a summit style format, you're not going to be going on a super deep bracket run, and I'd say the opponent that he probably matches in best with would be Tweak, just considering that he beat them on their last encounter, but I think Sephiroth does pretty well versus Samus, and you look at everyone else. I mean, he's got an abysmal record versus Bloom. Buzz isn't an option because he's got the Olimar. Game & Watch absolutely destroys Samus. Well, maybe not absolutely destroys, but I would definitely have Game & Watch winning. There's just not really a lot of amazing choices for Siskey to go into, so I think he has a chance versus Tweak, and to be fair, he has overcome the odds before, and he can again, but he's got some tough opponents. Next up is going to be Taric, the rising star in my opinion right now in Europe. There's a lot of them, but I've just been so impressed by Taric as of late. He's got a 7th place at Dose 2 Self, 25th place at SmashCon, 3rd place at Regen, 9th place at Terra, and a 2nd place at Gaming Hotel 2023. He's got an 0-4 record versus Sakuto, does have a 2-1 record versus Bloom, but he beat him twice at the same event, and it was over a year ago, so doesn't really mean a ton. 0-1 record versus the Buzz, and an 0-1 record versus MK Leo, and the opponent that I think he'll match best into is going to be Akala. Now, this isn't Copium. At least it's not Copium from me. It's Copium from the Greninja players, because every single Greninja matchup chart that I've seen, they all have Steve in the winning tier. And it's not like it's +2 easy. It's always +1 or +0.5. But Greninja players are very convinced that they do beat Steve. So I'm going to take Taric's word for it and say that he's got a good matchup going into Akala. Next up, you're going to have MFA. He's got a 9th place at Major Upset, 7th place at Back in Blood, 7th, and a 49th place at SmashCon. Now, MFA, bit of an interesting one. For anyone that doesn't know, he plays Olimar, and I think he still does play Captain Falcon, but Olimar, as of late, has been taking the main focus, and he has 0 sets played versus all of the players that are already qualified from this event, unless I just missed one. If I did, leave a comment down below. But that adds a little bit more drama. And if I had to guess who he's going to beat, I would say that it's the Europeans of Bloom Forever and Gluttony, because Europe is just notoriously bad versus Olimar. They don't have a top Olimar rep unless one popped up and I haven't noticed yet. That's always been a struggle for Europe. Like, if you're a top European player, please pick up Olimar. Even if you hate the character and it's not going to be good for any of your matchups, you're not going to use him in tournament, just let your fellow man learn, because Europe is struggling against this character, and I would favor MFA versus both Bloom and Gluttony, even though they are world-class players. Gluttony potentially top 5, Bloom Forever potentially top 20, but the Olimar, it's a bane in Europe's side. Next up, you're going to have Skyjay. Now, he's got a 13th place at Smash Factor X, 5th place at Summit, 2nd place at Collision. I know those two events are a little bit old, but they're so impressive I can't not mention them. 13th place at Low Tide City, 17th place at Battle of BC, and a 33rd place at SmashCon. Now, Skyjay, again, kind of what I mentioned earlier on with the Little Mac players, he doesn't have any great matchups going into this. I should say his head-to-heads. First, he's got a 2-5 record versus Spargo, 1-1 versus the Buzz, 0-2 versus Gluttony, 0-2 versus Tweak, 0-1 versus Light, Leo, and Akala. And I think the opponent that he's going to be doing the best against is probably going to be Bloom Forever. Now, the reason that I'm saying this is I'm looking at Skyjay's matchup chart right now. This may be a little bit dated, but the only characters that are even in the even tier, not winning, in the even tier are Bayonetta and Joker, at least that are probably going to make appearances in this bracket. Lucina as well, but you're going to have the Min for Proto Bonham. You're going to have 30 other characters for Leo, and technically, you have some counter picks for Bloom Forever, most notably the Mii Brawler, but that's also going to be an even matchup versus Incineroar, again, at least according to Skyjay. And I will say, playing Skyjay for the first time is extremely difficult, and Skyjay does have a fairly good record versus Mar. Overall, he's going to have a 3-0 record there, so I think Skyjay has enough experience in the matchup, and I assume that Bloom probably has no experience in the matchup, at least on the level of Skyjay, so I'm going to say that he catches him off guard and takes the upset. And our final player is going to be WebJP. He's got a 9th place at High Res, 17th place at Patchwork, and a really nice 25th at SmashCon. 0-2 record versus the Buzz, and an 0-1 records versus Leo, Tweak, and Aquila. And the player that I'm going to be favoring against is going to be both Spargo and Proto Bonheim. Now, the Spargo one, a little bit interesting, because the last time that Spargo played a really good Sheik player, it was Void at Summit, and he did end up losing that, but to be fair, I think that Sheik does really well versus Cloud, and Spargo stuck it out on Cloud the entire time. I don't think that's going to happen this time. I imagine that Spargo does play Aegis. I think Sheik actually does decent versus Aegis, though, but it's going to be a difficult battle. Proto Bonham, though, I think Sheik does really well versus Min. That's potentially Min's worst matchup, and I also think that Sheik does pretty well versus Lucina, so depending on who Proto Bonham picks, I think that WebJP could beat both. And then Spargo, again, against the Cloud, I would favor him more. Against the Aegis, I would favor him less, but and before we do wrap it up, I want to talk about the players that I personally want to see in the event. Again, we only really have 2 spots to pick from because Karama is pretty much a guaranteed. Even if he wasn't, though, he would have been on my list because he is a movement-based player, one of the best movement-based players in the game, and that's really what I enjoy watching in Smash. Next up is going to be Luis. Palutena is naturally just a boring character, and in tournament, a boring character usually means that you're a linear character, so it's up to the Palutena players to make some spice, to add the variety, to catch people off guard, and Luis is one of the best Palutena players in the entire world doing that. So fun to watch him play, and also he's a Fox player at heart, which means he got that extra fire in him. So Luis is my second pick, and my final pick is going to be T3 Dom. Again, this is not a guy that we get to see often, and whenever we do, he pulls out the sickest Belmont combos I've ever seen. Belmont is a naturally lame character, don't get me wrong, but T3 Dom's Belmont is built literally different, and I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. This isn't going to be the last video I make on Watch the Throne because there's still going to be 3 other qualifying events, and again, a link will be down below the merch shop. I highly recommend that you at least check it out, and if you want to support your favorite players, buy some merch and send the votes their way. And that's all I gotta say. The support has been absolutely unreal as of late. If I got anything wrong, missed a head-to-head, or if you just want to say hi, please leave a comment down below. Be sure to sub, all that yada yada, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye!